as compared to straight men, the gay men have very, very different kinds of polymorphisms on chromosome 13, chromosome 8, chromosome 14, and the classical X chromosome. So this is what we call it as a gay gene is probably thought to lie here. Differences on these 105 genes, there are differences on the X chromosome between gay men and straight men. So this tells us that there are definitive genetic differences between men with different sexual preferences.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us again on AskHowAbout. I'm your host, extraordinary Pranay J. Reddy. Now, this week's episode is a continuation, a part 2, if you can, of the previous week's episode on sexuality. Previous week, we covered basic topics, or rather the basis of why sexuality is completely natural. Last week, if you remember, I asked you guys to talk about sexuality with your elders in your family. Do share what happened in those, if you can, because I predict there'll be a lot of funny stories to come out of that. Do it this week as well. Now, in this week's episode, as mentioned in the previous week, our main goal is to further what we established last week. Now, there were basics established last week, and this episode we're going to talk about the proteins which are different, how exactly the genetic codes which are different, and also how the brain chemistry of a person with different sexuality can be different from one another. So it's really intriguing, and it's really exciting as well, because it's stuff which I'm pretty sure most of us, including me, did not know before this. So, again, we have our expert, Dr. Deepak Modi.
Okay.
Well, so that was pretty interesting. He showed the LGBT spectrum. So now we know there are more than just LGBT in that spectrum, but because of the number of proteins he showed, which influence our brain's sexuality. Can you say that? Can you say it influences our brain sexuality? Yeah.
Yes.
So because of the number of proteins there are, so a number of combinations can give rise to different sexualities. Am I reading that right?
Absolutely. Depending on the number of proteins, are kind of centers that in the brain which could which could have taken a different decision. For example, I know my social scientist friends criticize me heavily here because I say that they're male-like professions and they're female-like professions. But if we assume that, when we say that if a guy loves cooking or tries doing fashion, they say, ye ladkiyon wala profession kyun kar raha hai? Now imagine that person may be straight. The person may not have a different sexual preference, but his choice in the brain towards a particular profession may have taken an alternate decision, may have taken a different decision. So you can imagine the entire brain programming need not be uniform in every individual. It could be very, very diverse. And this could be leading to this entire spectrum of alternate sexual preference, not in just terms of sexuality, but in terms of behaviors, in terms of traits, in terms of a whole lot of things.
Well, this puts a whole new perspective to a girl-like feeling or a guy-like feeling, because technically you're saying that it's all programming present already. So then I'd like to ask further one question along that is the genetics part of it. Now, how does it know which genetics of it to get activated when and when not? Or technically, according to the study, then they are not a mistake. It's just a random process, right?
Yes. So the point is that when we talk of genetics, and when we talk of brain wiring or any form, when we use the term genetics, we love to get mathematics into that. And we want everything that is very hardwired there and which are decisions which are taken by extremely, very, very well-defined changes done there. When I talk now the question that you may ask me is that how is a decision different between the brain and the gonad in case of certain individuals? Why is this decision different? Why can't all the cells behave very congruently? So here there is what we call it as a genetic basis of sexuality, which is now the theory which is gaining a wider importance. I'll again share the screen here where we have something quite interesting that's come up in the last 1 decade or so, where people have actually tried to look for genetic differences between males and females, between the different sexual preference. So when we look at these genetic differences. Now, what we call it, they're very subtle differences even in the genes. So although we think that all humans are equal genetically, but it is up to the 99.99%. The 0.001% difference can bring in the difference between you and me, our skin color, our eye color, the way our hair is, the way each of the individual is different across the world, are what we would call it as very, very subtle differences, or what is defined as polymorphisms. To make it very simple for everyone, for example, I spell my name as Deepak. This is how I spell Deepak. But when there is a Dipak, there's not much change. It doesn't change anything major, but the protein which is made out of such may be slightly different. For example, by speaking of Deepak, whether it's DWPK or DIPAK would not make any difference. But legally, it may make a difference. And such a kind of protein may have a different effect than this kind of a protein. In extreme circumstances, the K may just get dropped off, and I can be called as Deepa, and that will be completely a different kind of a protein which is made, and that can have a different effect on the brain. So this is what we call it as polymorphism, and very interesting studies have been done where they have compared such minor differences between gay men and straight men. And they've tried to see if these differences contribute towards sexuality of an individual. And they're very, very interesting studies. So what we call it as load scores, or what we call it as associations. And people have shown that as compared to straight men, the gay men have very, very different kinds of polymorphisms on chromosome 13, chromosome 8, chromosome 14, and the classical X chromosome. So this is what we call it as a gay gene, is probably thought to lie here. And this is almost 105 genes in which there are differences on these 105 genes. There are differences on the X chromosome between gay men and straight men. So this tells us that there are definitive genetic differences between men with different sexual preferences. I'll just share one more interesting study, which this has been done in my friend's lab in the USA, Dr. Eric William. And he said that, okay, gay men and straight men have a lot of genetic differences. But he took what we call it as twins, which are called it as monozygotic twins. Now, in monozygotic twins, there are absolute 100% concordancy in the genes. But some of these twins have different sexual preferences. That is what we call it a discordant gay siblings. So one of the sibling is gay, but the other sibling is not. And they tried and see that, okay, now in these little subtle differences also will not exist because they exactly come from the same sperm and the same egg. But they looked at chemical differences on these genes, what we call it as epigenetic changes. And what they found was something very, very exciting. Again, in this study, they could show that on the X chromosome, there are distinct genetic differences between a gay twin versus a straight twin. So these things together tell us that such chemical changes on the DNA or epigenetic modifications on the DNA and combined with certain polymorphisms on the other genes can determine sexuality.
From what I understand, what you're telling me is we have those genes in us already. Okay,
Yes.
all of us, all human beings do. But because of they are only expressed in people with different sexualities, so for the sexuality to arise. So technically, that means there's nothing wrong. Like people, the way they condemn them or criticize them, this because that person who's criticizing them could potentially very well become that sexual preference of which he or she is criticizing, because they have that genes in them.
Absolutely. All of us have the same X chromosome. All of us have the same sets of genes. It is only for certain reason that in a particular individual, the gene was expressed in a slightly different way as compared to some other individuals. And that is giving, and these subtle differences are the ones which giving us a huge difference in the sexual preferences in these conditions.
So coming back to the point which you raised about brain and the genetics, so this would have a significant alteration in the brain chemistry of it. So can you elaborate a bit on that?
Oh, yes. So this is very interesting. So, of course, people have been trying to see that are the brains of these two individuals very different? Because we have this idea that sexuality is also decided by the brain. So, what has been done is, of course, classically people were studying brains only by behavioral patterns, but now we are able to image the brain, and now we're able to image the brain when the person is totally conscious. And there have been very beautiful studies done which show that the way the male and the female brains respond to different stimuli are very, very different. So these are called as functional MRIs, and I'll show you one of the slides of the image of a functional MRI. This is taken from a published data, and where we say that so these are functional MRIs of a region called as amygdala, which is the area of sense and emotions. And here you see that you can see the red and the yellow signals here. You can make them out here, that they are red and yellow signals. So these are the regions where there is maximum activity found. And you can see that in the males as compared, and you can look at it in the females. The regions which are getting activated are completely different between the males and the females. This particular study, which was published in 2008, also compared to that of a homosexual man. And you can see that the activation in the amygdala in the homosexual males is very much like the female brain and very much unlike its male heterosexual counterparts. And look at this next one. The homosexual women, the lesbians, and the activation of the amygdala and the lesbians occur almost like the male counterpart, and it does not anywhere look close to the heterosexual woman. So this definitely tells us that all these genetic differences which are happening during development, the wiring which has happened during development is actually now functionally different between the individuals who are straight and individuals who are homosexual.
So this whole notion of people thinking it's a choice, it's a fallacy.
Absolutely, it's a fallacy. I mean, you cannot choose your sexuality. I mean, I do not blame the people who are having this theory that homosexuality is choice or sexuality is a choice, because that's how we have been, kind of programmed socially to think about.
One thing I would like to ask is, just keeping away from this, in terms of developmental biology, because all of this was done when the single cells, when the cells were in the womb, to see how they develop. How are they, or rather, what were the techniques used in order to study all this?
Okay, so when we want to study a lot of developmental biology, it requires a lot of sophisticated tools. For example, when we want to measure gene expression, we have to get this machine called as a real-time PCR machine. And interestingly, this is the same machine today is used for corona diagnostics.
Okay.
Then we require a very sophisticated microscope to see where these proteins are sitting. Then we want to sequence these genes, whether there are any differences between the male and the homosexual and the heterosexual individuals. And if you want to sequence the genes, there are sequences which are required. So it requires a lot of sophisticated setup, and of course these studies are very, very expensive. But once we are so these are actually the no unique setup required. Most of the biological research laboratories will have them or will have access to one or more of these technologies, and the people who are studying it very, very effectively.
Well, this sir, I know you've been in the forefront of this development and publishing such papers which absolutely destroys this notion that sexuality is a choice. But I'd also like to ask you, this is not something which happened in the past few months or 1 year or 2 years. This study has been out there. I personally can say that I was only exposed to this a few months ago. Why hasn't this study been more out there? Why aren't more people aware about this? Maybe this
yes, so that's a $1 million point, and the part of the problem lies in the timelines. So when I say timelines, remember the genetic theory of sexuality is a newbie in the town. It's just in last 1 decade or probably 2 decades that we have been trying to say that sexuality and behavior are genetically programmed. Whereas the behavioral theory of the social context of behavior, or the social theory of behavior and the social theory of sexuality, is probably more than a century old. So obviously, when you are new in the town, you have fewer friends, you have fewer people who can understand you. Whereas when somebody is all around there for donkey years, then everybody knows them well. So they're more famous versus the others less famous. But trust me, it's just a matter of time. As slowly and slowly more data is getting collected to understand sex and sexuality at the genetic level, the theory of genetics of sexuality is also slowly getting acceptance, and I'm sure in time to come this would be more acceptable. But here I must put up a point that it's not very nice to compartmentalize the social or the sociology theory of sexuality over the genetic theory of sexuality. Remember, none of these two can act independently. They have to overlay one on another. So I have a slightly different perspective to this whole thing. I feel that genetics set up a framework. It gives a skeleton to the individual, and then the social priming then plays layers and layers over it, and then ultimately that's what an individual is made up of. So for example, I can give you that an individual may have very, very subtle genetic differences in the person, and that person actually may not turn out to be a person of individual alternate sexual preference. So let's say that there is a male who has very small genetic differences, which does not really translate much into the gay for being a gay. But however, if such a person has a very strong social priming, may have probably a early life sexual insult, or probably is exposed to a different kind of environment, a person can have an alternate sexual preference. In contrast, there could be individuals which have many, many genes which are making them predisposed to homosexuality, and such a person, even in absence of any social priming, can get to the LGBTQ spectrum. So you can imagine that these are kind of now interwound together. Genetic experience, genetic makeup, followed by early life experiences, followed by social experiences, and the hormones which come into picture will together make an individual. We cannot compartmentalize these two in that direction.
Well, this has certainly been enlightening for me, and I'm pretty sure for the viewers who are watching this, they'll have a better understanding and are more important than anything, they're more aware of what's actually happening. Because I think one of the biggest problems with this topic in general, we're just asking people to be open about something where people are not aware. I think that is where the skepticism arises from. And so, yeah, and
absolutely,
so, please go on.
Good.
Yeah, and so that's where I personally believe studies like yours, who, which illuminate a lot of light on the subject, we throw light on the subject, and this can actually lead for more people to being open in the future.
Absolutely, it's time that now we forget these differences. That the social theory of sexuality is correct, and the biological theory, the genetic theory of sexuality is wrong. It's not the time now to kind of compartmentalize and start fighting amongst each other. It is time the geneticists, developmental biologists, doctors, social scientists, we all come together to understand the LGBTQ spectrum. But I must really pinpoint here that it is not going to be possible without the LGBT folks by themselves. I really love this quote from Dr. Abhay Bang. He's a very famous physician turned scientist, and he runs an NGO in Gadchiroli. And he says that if you want to have effective results, first he says that research can be done on the people, research can be done for the people, and research can be done by the people. Now, when we do research on the people, which has been done for donkey years, people have done research on LGBTQ individuals. So what is that this is now completely dissociated. Those who are doing research have absolutely using these individuals as guinea pigs and subjects, and nothing more than that. They're really not bothered what these individuals are going through. And that's a part of the problem. Then research has been done with the people. So then people said that, no, you cannot use these people as guinea pigs. You have to do with them. So they went to the community, but then again did the same kind of experiment. So we have now come where we have done research on LGBTQ. We have research done with the LGBTQ people. But now it is time that the LGBTQ community wakes up and says that, no, this is the kind of research we need. If we have to get a more social acceptance of the spectrum, then we need more research. And this research is essentially going to stem by by also involvement of a strong involvement of the community. It is we have to get into this space, and the questions have to come from this community, that okay, these are the kinds of things that as individuals we are suffering. This is the problem that we have, and then we as scientists and doctors and social scientists together should come and solve the problem. I love this beautiful Chinese poem. It says, it roughly translates to that: go to the people, live among them, love them, listen to them, begin with what they know, and then build upon to what they have. So it is that when we actually be with the people who are within the spectrum, when we understand them, when we try to see what is happening with them, and it's only when they tell us what is happening to them that we will truly reach the better understanding of sexuality and hence acceptance of this entire spectrum. So I hope this conversation will sow some seeds in this direction and empower the community, and soon we should be able to see some fresh perspectives on sex, gender, and sexuality.
Well, sir, that is truly the hope. And as long as people like you, as long as researchers are open to this idea and really produce research of such magnitude, well then, definitely, because it's not in the far future, it's in the very near future. So I'd like to thank you for being a part of the show and talking about all of this. And for me personally, it was very enlightening. I really did know a lot of stuff which I did not know before. I'm pretty sure that'll be the same point of view of the viewers as well. So thank you for being on the show.
Thank you, Pranay. Thank you very much for inviting, and it has been fun and pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Now that concludes the interview. And this also concludes the two-part episode on sexuality. And the reason we decided to do 2 episodes is because we wanted to take a deep dive into this topic. Because again, it's not a simple topic to cover. It's a wide area. And there's still a lot left to cover, to be very honest with you. But one thing I really hope that you all took away from these 2 episodes is to understand that sexuality is completely natural. And there shouldn't be anything awkward when you discuss it among your peers or even amongst your family. Although again, if you did, please do share in the comments. Now the one thing I really hope all of you took away from these 2 episodes is that sexuality is completely natural. And there should not be any awkwardness when you're talking to your peers or not even your family members for that matter when that topic comes up. Although if you did, please do share what happened. And yeah, I said it might be funny, but honestly, I really hope it's not. I really do hope that after watching this video, or rather, after sharing this video to your friends or to your family members, it is clear that sexuality is something completely natural and it's nothing to be awkward about. And more than that, I also hope you understood the scope of the field of developmental biology due to this. Because the only way you could study all these things was through the field of developmental biology. So, I really hope you understood the scope. I really hope you understood sexuality as a term and how it happens. And I hope you're more aware of sexuality because of these 2 episodes. Well, if you did do all those, please do like, share and subscribe. And if you didn't like the video, well then, you hurt my feelings. So please do like, share and subscribe. Thank you so much.
What we do here is go back.